Hey everyone, this is Landon giving you guys a quick little update. Some of the rosters that I mentioned in this video have started to be announced. At the time of the recording, they had yet to be released, and the content in the video still applies. It all still makes sense. I just wanted to provide a quick little bit of an update before I started seeing comments about it. So I appreciate you guys for watching this segment, and thank you so much for watching the dispatch. Only a few days remain for the largest roster change period of the season, and with that comes a ton of new lineups. While everyone in the Call of Duty community eagerly awaits the announcements, I thought it'd be interesting to go over which lineup I think looks the best right now, which rumored lineup that is. And in fact, I even tweeted out asking everyone else's thoughts on the subject in terms of which team they thought was looking the best as well, and we'll be getting into a few of those here in just a bit. So let's go ahead and get an idea for the new rumored lineups and start to kind of go over them. So the first team I want to talk on is going to be Denial. Now this team's rumored lineup looks like Bance, Joe, Rated, Brack, and Alex. Now, all of these are pretty much confirmed as of this moment. If you do a little bit of searching, you'll kind of find all of that out for yourself. Now, for the most part, I obviously think this team, and really, and for everyone's opinion, this team is filled up with Red Reserve players, right? You have 3 out of the 5. The old Denial is totally removed from this team, and it essentially gets a total refresh. Like for the Red Reserve guys, the situation that they were in, all of the talk about the organization, they get kind of a fresh start, which I think is only going to help them out quite a bit. I mean, there were many times where we were looking at them and saying, you know, maybe their performances are starting to kind of get stunted a little bit based on the situation that they're in, based off all the stress of maybe not wanting to compete as hard as you previously have wanted to for an organization that maybe isn't really performing the best or to the ability that they should be. So Bance, Rated, Joe, Bance, Joe, and Rated, come from Red Reserve. Alex comes from Free Agency / Team Sween, and Brack comes from Accelerate. So for me, I like what this team managed to accomplish in terms of Red Reserve now to Denial. In this period, acquiring Brack and Alex, I think will drastically improve this team's ability to win series. If you talk about the regular 3, who would have they been able to acquire? I think those 2 are actually fantastic picks because I know for Alex, he had been kind of waiting for a chance. I know he had a few opportunities from teams previously, and he kind of denied a few of those, or at least had the opportunity and maybe kind of strayed away from time to time because he wanted to kind of work out a situation that worked best for him. In terms of roles, I think based on Brack and Alex's positions, I think we'll see most likely Bance translate over to the SMG side of things alongside Joe. And that does worry me a tad because that's the biggest gripe I have for this group is going to be SMGs for Denial now. It reminds me very much of UIU's position previously, where the AR talent was there. It was definitely there in terms of Maddoxes and ICRs, but the SMGs weren't strong enough to free up lanes. They weren't strong enough to find those first bloods and entry and hard points. And that issue continued to cause UIU to have a very, very horrible search and destroy record in the league. And I know for Joe and Bance, they averaged so far in the Pro League as of this moment a combined 0.82 KD in search and destroy. But I think if we could see a consistent performance come through from them, they will ultimately make this team so much better because I think in terms of ARs, you're looking great. My biggest gripe for Denial is going to come when it comes down to the SMG side of things. That may cause a little bit of a problem, but I think for the most part, Denial can kind of sit comfortably and say, you know what, we have a pretty good team. Like in terms of what we had compared to what we have now, you could argue based on how the old Denial, the French lineup was looking, but I think for this team, they're really relying on those new pickups to really kind of put them into the next level if they want to be there. Now let's go and move on now to our next lineup, which we've got Evil Geniuses. Now this team's rumored to be Attach, Exotic, JCap, Apathy, and Phantoms. Now there have been a lot of teams there's been a lot of questions, I guess you could say, on this team in terms of what their true ability is. There's been a lot of people who have been saying, oh, well, yeah, look at all the accomplishments that this team has. Look at all the chemistry that could be there. And you also have the other side of the conversation of people saying, well, I don't see any Slayers. I don't really see anyone who's going to stick out and really lead this team. So there's kind of been a dueling, opinions, I guess you could say different sides of opinions that the community has kind of been arguing about when this rumored lineup has been brought forth. And for me, 5v5 continues to surprise in terms of the chemistry to slang ratio, right? Because for me, the hardest thing coming into 5v5, I was thinking, okay, well, hey, how much is chemistry going to play a factor? I thought it was going to play much more of a factor than it has, and obviously you need a mixture of both, but which one will put you in a situation to succeed? Like, which one do you need a little bit more of first than the other. And I think, while, like I said, each team must have both, which has the higher percentage, I think is still up to you. For me, I think I relate on slang first rather than chemistry first. I think chemistry ultimately is what gets you over the edge, but I think slang is what you have to start off with. But I think if that question still remains out there, I think this team could be one to contend that, right, in terms of how chemistry can work, compared to slang, compared to the slang, side of things. Because I like all 5 of these guys together. From a teamwork point of view, I really do. I like all of these guys. I think they're going to work well together. I think they're going to have a lot of chemistry together. But my thing is, in terms of when it's time to slay, when it's time to get in those respawns, when you're, down 2-1 heading into a hard point, how are you going to respond, right? How are you going to perform when it comes down to those modes? Now, one thing is very true. You've got 5 world championships on this lineup. JCap won a 1 ring with Attach. He won 1 with Apathy. And I also like that Evil Geniuses decided to bring in some new blood in Phantoms and obviously he's mostly notable as of recently for playing on FC Black. We saw him have quite a bit of success when it came down to that team, and I actually got a chance to cast over this guy early in World War II, and ever since I saw him play, I think he has the very solid ability of becoming a Rookie of the Year candidate. And while it's a little bit late in the year, I think he has someone... I think he kind of has the similar skills to someone like Brack, who made an instant impact from Midnight, obviously to EXG. He was a super solid player and still remains to be. And we obviously just talked about his lineup on Denial Now. But I think he plays very similar in terms of now relating back to Phantoms. He plays very similar to like an Octane. And I thought of this very early on in World War II, watching him play game modes like CTF on Arden Forest, and just watching the way that he holds down lanes. The refined position that he plays and the way that he challenges things, he makes sure that he doesn't challenge the wrong thing. Let's go ahead and say that way. Very similar to like how an Octane has previously worked, even back to Jetpack Call of Duties, where it's very difficult for a lot of standard ARs to kind of stand still, to make the right decisions, to not rush things that they didn't need to. And I think, honestly, for me, one of my favorite things about all this roster change period is to see a young guy who I think has a lot of potential, like Phantoms, to be paired alongside a lot of these world champions, most specifically JCap. I think he's going to teach him a lot. I think he's going to improve him when it comes down to his career. And I think that's going to be a really big factor for him in his overall future, is being able to play alongside veterans like JCap, who are going to tell him how to play the right way. He's going to teach him a lot about rotations and how a main AR should play, because JCap's played with some of the best of them, right? I mean, I think personally the combination of JCap and Octane together back in late AW was fantastic for Octane's career. I think it really kind of propelled him for the future to be the player that he is today and continues to be. But I will say, on the topic of JCap, I've been very critical of his teams, right? E United more specifically. I felt as if he didn't have enough shooters by his side. The assist man needs someone to pass to and not for someone to keep passing it back. And I will say, I'm interested to see the combo of guys like Attach, Exotic, and Phantoms together, but I'm not sure that trio is going to be able to compare with some of the best teams right now. And obviously, I've talked about everyone else. I also have to cover Apathy. I think he's currently out of place. I think ever since the early scrimmages that I was watching with Envy, he constantly was getting found out in terms of being off by himself, making the wrong decisions. And I think if his performance can kind of get brought back up to that typical Apathy form, and I will say he's known as more of an inconsistent player and always kind of has been throughout his career, I think if he can kind of get back to that regular form, I think he could be a great addition on the SMG side of things. But my worry is team challenges. My worry is how he can play alongside the others, how he can entry, how he can kind of use that SOG position and actually utilize it to the correct way, because there's a lot of players who are out there right now who are very gifted when it comes down to reaction, when it comes down to their shot, but how do you play in that 5v5 scenario? How are you contributing to your teammates or to your team's success in different game modes? And I think that's one thing that Apathy has struggled in so far in this game. But I think one thing for sure, this is what I heard over a few rumors, was that Brack possibly, this was a possible destination for him to go toward, and I think that would have been awesome for this team. It would have been in place, I think, of Exotic at the time, so you can kind of weigh both options. But I think if that possibly goes through, I think you might have a little bit more wiggle room to a certain extent, but I am excited to see Exotic play and to see exactly how this team will perform, especially when it comes into champs time, because we know exactly how JCap plays. We know how JCap leads. We know how Apathy plays when it comes down time for champs, and I think that possibly could lead to this team causing some upsets and possibly performing when it comes down to a few of the, kind of later tournaments in this game. Now, let's quickly move on to our next team. We've got FaZe. Now, what seems to be the case is that FaZe is purchasing Red Reserve's league spot as Red departs from the Call of Duty esports scene, and the roster is supposedly Zuma, Asim, Celium, Zero, and Skrapz. I think I said Asim right. It might be Asim. People go back and forth. I haven't even heard the guy speak, so I'm not 100% sure myself. We'll go with Asim. First impressions, I like this group. I do. I like this team on paper. It's interesting for me to see all these players lined up because they haven't really played with each other in terms of that EU and NA combination. But this is one team that I think has some real potential in every category. In terms of SMGs, I'm excited to see Asim play. I'm getting back and forth on that. Now, I do have my questions in terms of big matchups. I know he hasn't played his best, but he continues to be a topic amongst a lot of top pros out there, and usually when pros are giving a certain amateur player a lot of props, giving him a lot of different opportunities, it's for good reason. I mean, we go back to a number of different titles. At BZ, most recently, a lot of people had questions when EU United picked him up. Is he going to be able to perform? Is he a good enough player? Does he have enough experience? And I think those questions have been answered and have been multiple times in the past. Also, adding an incredible player, arguably top 5. People even want to argue him higher. We'll just say arguably top 5 for now in the game. Skrapz, right? He's going to be a tremendous help for this team in terms of just having someone to rely on. I mean, there were many moments for Red Reserve when they would be struggling in series, and you just see Skrapz up there with like a 1.3, 1.4 KD, very similar to someone like Gunless of LG, that he just doesn't really, not that he doesn't have a bad series, but normally when the opposing players or even his players are struggling, there is someone who is totally rising above the ranks and continues to kind of be that brute force guy who can kind of lead the team in terms of slaying. I think that's what Skrapz is going to do. I've heard a few rumors about the main AR positions possibly going towards Zero, which kind of surprised me when you have a guy like Celium on the team. I'm not sure how I feel about that, and honestly, when it comes down to new teams kind of having those odd roster, or rather those odd role changes, it worries me because of the honeymoon stage, of the honeymoon period. It happens to every single roster. They team up, they have one really good series or have one really good day of scrims, and this guy's saying, oh yeah, I can run the main AR. This isn't a problem. The ICR feels great. And then over time, things start to change, and it can honestly derail them from a lot of their future success. So I think regardless, though, if they can kind of work things out, possibly get dedicated or Celium to that main ICR, to that main AR role, I think that they're going to be looking great. Like I said, they're one of the only teams to me that fills every role and that I feel confident in. And that's why I think we're seeing teams recently like Hunter T start to succeed. They cover the SMG, they cover the Maddox, they cover the ICR, and that's the reason why I think they're succeeding in multiple game modes, is because the chemistry is obviously there. But first and foremost, the talent is there, the slang is there most primarily. Now let's quickly move on to our fourth and final team, which is the boys in blue, Team Envy. Their rumored lineup is rumored to be Aches, Hook, Silly, Decimate, and Pharaoh. Now this team is kind of interesting for me. I think that there are a lot of contributing factors that could make this team actually really good. I really do. There's a lot of people who are kind of out there who either think they're going to be great or think they're going to be kind of maybe toward the worst side of things, that they didn't really improve their roster. So I think regardless, though, the offseason addition of getting someone like Decimate is huge. From what we saw in his early stages in Black Ops 4 for G2, he was fantastic with the SOG, leading in every single game mode for his team on multiple occasions. And I think to combine him with one of the best SOGs in the game, you could argue the best SOG in the entire game, and Hook is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be absolutely phenomenal to watch, and this is one thing that we wanted to see from Envy at the beginning of the year. Everyone, including myself, was talking about, oh my gosh, we're going to see Hook combined with Apathy. This is going to be wonderful. And it didn't really pan out the way that we exactly wanted to. Apathy was not playing his greatest Call of Duty. Hook was. And so I think to have someone who has already performed in this game alongside Hook, he and Decimate are going to be a really fun pair to watch. I think if Silly keeps up his level of play, if Pharaoh can communicate and work together kind of in an orchestrated system, one that's already developed most likely by the mastermind of Aches and Bevels, I think they're going to be a really good team. I think they're going to absolutely improve from their prior inconsistencies, I guess you could say. I think one thing Envy did right, which I'm a big fan of, is that they realized and they correctly identified what kind of squad they were. They realized where their strengths come from in terms of what players they wanted to add, what talent they already had previously. And what made the previous iteration of Team Envy so inconsistent for me was their lack of wins in the clutch, their ability to be a super solid search and destroy team on paper, and then they come out in respawns, and sometimes they have super solid performances. Then they struggle in search and destroys. Then they look great in search and destroys, and then the respawns start to falter. They get toward game 5, and it's just a multitude of different things, and they really don't get it done in the end. So I think for me, adding guys like Pharaoh and Decimate, who have a big history in search and destroy, who have also played alongside each other and have played alongside Bevels all on the same team just 1 year ago, I think is going to make for a lot of tactical gameplay. It's going to allow for a lot of search and destroy strategies, which was the big factor that allowed Evil Geniuses to win COD Champs last year. We talked about their very close series they had with Optic, but as they started to move through the ranks, it was their ability, their knowledge, their search and destroy that really put them over the edge, that allowed for a lot of teams to not know what was coming. And you could argue that this team might have that same ability. They might have that same strength as the kind of tactfulness, we'll go ahead and say that word out there, that they might have moving forward. So I'm excited to see how they play, and obviously as well, Hook and Decimate, they were playing under Envy last year at Champs where they finished top 6. They kind of already have a little bit of that established chemistry. Now, I really think, like I said, this team has a lot of possible upside. I think they have the ability to improve heavily on their prior faults. Most importantly, the inconsistency that they were facing off in a number of different series. Now, we've covered all 4 of our teams and their rumored lineups. Let's see what Twitter has to say. Now, if you don't already, you can follow myself on Twitter at Lando for the future to stay up to date on all things related to the Dispatch. And if you ever have any thoughts on episodes like this one or prior ones, future ones, you can always feel free to use the hashtag the Esports Dispatch, much like everyone else has in relation to my tweet and my post asking you which rumored roster is looking the strongest right now and why. Now, the poll pretty much speaks for itself. Quite a few votes have gone for FaZe, then Envy in second. It's kind of a little bit of a battle going on between the bottom 2 and EG and Denial. But let's see exactly what Dominic says. He says, a lot of people seem to be sleeping on Denial. This includes a few of the better European players that have had the chance to truly show their potential, along with the NA madman himself, Brack. This is definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with. And I absolutely agree with that. I think Brack is a phenomenal talent. I know he didn't really mention Alex in this one as well, but I think Alex is going to really come in and have a really big showcase for them. But I think for me, right, he mentioned the Red Reserve players. I mean, Bance and Joe are the factors for me. They are going to be what makes or breaks this team is going to be the SMG side of things, because they look great on the ARs, but in terms of the SMGs, how is that going to factor? How is that kind of that balance going to work out? But massive thanks to our buddy Dominic for sending in that tweet. Next one we've got is coming in from King Wolverine. He simply says, envious. They are filled with young talent and experienced leadership. Hook is in the conversation of top 5, if not best player in the game. Pharaoh and Decimate are bringing chemistry, gun skill, and S&D prowess, nice word, back with the leadership of Aches and Silly. And he brings up a very sound point, right? Chemistry is important, especially for what this team will most likely play like. I definitely agree with the conversation of Hook. I think a lot of people can look at a SOG and say, oh, it's whatever. But no, I mean, I think Hook is without question in that top 5 discussion. A lot of people kind of throw him out there. They think of Dashy, they think of Gunless and Temp, but I think Hook's one of those guys who could easily be up there. I mean, you talk about a number of different players, but guys like Arcane and Slasher who are kind of being thrown up there as of recent. You talk about Priest, I mean, there's a lot of different guys who can kind of be Scraps even who could be thrown in that conversation, but I think Hook deserves to be there. But I agree with everything that he said in regards to that. Next one we have comes from Jacob. He said, one team that might fly under the radar here is EG. That team has a combined 5 rings on it, and sure, their performances have not been great this year, but they are hungry to prove all their doubters wrong. Led by Revan, I see this team causing upsets, and I agree with what Jacob said there. I think five rings. That discussion is very true. And that shouldn't be, oh, they haven't played that great in this title, it doesn't really matter. No, 5 rings means consistency, right? That means that they have won over multiple titles. And you talk about apathy of last year, that team wasn't looking great, but he turned up and they had that flip of the switch and they just happened to kind of lead. So maybe this EG team could be following along the same lines of prior ones in terms of what they're really going to be able to do, of what their abilities possibly could be. So I absolutely agree. I think this team should be fun to watch. And like I said, we know what they've done in prior. We know what Apathy's done in prior. And you get those guys toward Champs time. Like I said, you get Apathy and you get JCap there when it's time for Champs, and they just look like totally different players. So I absolutely agree. I think they have the ability to cause upsets. My issue with that is, how is the consistency going to be? Because you can have moments where you turn up, but I'm worried about that possible downward spiral that they're going to have as well. Let's move on to our last tweet, which comes from Alicia Wicks. She says, FaZe will definitely be the strongest coming into London with Cellium's performance during Fort Worth, plus the likely addition of Skrapz and Zero. You can't deny that they'll hold the biggest clutches throughout the series. And much like Alicia, I agree. I agree as of this moment. FaZe roster, in my opinion, does look the strongest. They have the most guaranteed per position. I know I didn't really mention a whole lot about Cellium, but I mean, he was looking fantastic, like she mentioned, at Fort Worth. Just looked like a totally different player. I mean, there were times throughout even the Pro League qualifiers we were giving him a lot of props, and then it kind of started to round out a little bit. And we saw search and destroy clutches. And I think for me, this team fills the gaps. They fill the main AR. They fill the Maddox, especially with Skrapz. They fill the SMGs. My worry comes from the SMGs, but I think it's fair to say that there isn't a whole lot of doubt that can come through in comparison to, we want to talk about denial. Like, I feel a lot more confident in FaZe's SMGs than I would on other teams. I think Asim has a really possible big upside. I think Zuma's a lot more motivated. And we know, right? I mean, Zuma didn't have the greatest start to Black Ops 4, but I think he absolutely has the ability to turn up and I think lead this team. But I am curious about the honeymoon stage and how they can improve. But thank you to everyone who sent in their comments. We'll definitely be doing something like that again. But make sure, much like they did, if you guys are interested, to use the hashtag the Esports Dispatch to continue the conversation on Twitter.